Myrnohrad is cracking faster than most headlines admit, and what is happening there is not a slow grind anymore. Russia is squeezing from the ground while smashing from the air, and the goal is simple: break Ukraine's rhythm, then force a mistake that turns a city into a trap. From the outside, this can look like another town being traded for time. But that reading is dangerous because Ukraine is not just holding or losing streets here. Ukraine is shaping what Russia thinks it sees, and that difference can decide who bleeds and who moves. A pullback can look like weakness, yet it can also be a setup, because once attackers believe the door is open, they rush in without watching the hinges. That is where machine guns, drones, and fast airstrikes can turn a victory walk into a sudden collapse of confidence. So the real question is not whether Russia enters southern Myrnohrad. The real question is what price Russia pays the moment it thinks the fight is already over. For more clear reporting on real battles, modern weapons, and the politics behind them, subscribe to Military Force. Now stay with this story, because the first move was not an assault. It was a withdrawal designed to hurt. Donetsk is turning harsher by the day, because Russia is not only driving toward Pokrovsk, it is also hammering Myrnohrad to widen the pressure and tighten the shape of a future encirclement. The point is not one street fight, because the campaign logic is to threaten two linked towns at the same time and force Ukraine to split attention. When artillery and glide bombs keep landing while assault groups probe for gaps, defenders lose the calm minutes they need to rotate teams and move supplies. Even small Russian gains can matter, because each step forward changes angles, opens new firing lanes, and shortens the distance to key roads. This is how a local push becomes a city problem, and that is why Myrnohrad cannot be treated as background noise behind Pokrovsk. That wider squeeze is what makes the southern edge of Myrnohrad the first place to crack under strain. The southern defensive clusters became more exposed over time, because slow attrition is designed to make a position visible before it is destroyed. A trench line can survive shelling, but it struggles when drones keep spotting movement and when every resupply run risks being tracked. This is not the same as giving up, because modern defense is often about preserving a force that can fight again behind the first line. If a unit stays too long in an exposed pocket, it may score kills, yet it can also lose radios, vehicles, medics, and leaders in the same week. That kind of loss does not show on a map, but it shows later when a new line has to be built with weaker teams. A controlled pullback can save manpower because it reduces the chance of panic exits under direct fire. It can also protect heavy weapons because guns and launchers that withdraw in order can still support the next line. So the decision point was not heroic or cowardly. It was a calculation about what must survive for the defense to continue. That calculation only works if the retreat is planned like an operation, not treated like an escape. An organized withdrawal starts where the risk is highest, because the most exposed area is also the place most likely to be sealed off first. In Myrnohrad, that meant the southern sector had to be treated as a danger zone, even if some positions there were still firing and holding. The goal is to move before routes become death corridors, because roads that look open at noon can be covered by evening once enemy units shift. This is why timing becomes a weapon, because leaving early can feel painful, yet leaving late can be fatal. A pullback also has to be staged, because units cannot all move at once without creating traffic, confusion, and gaps that invite a chase. So commanders shape the exit, keep key paths open, and stagger movement so that a force arrives intact, not scattered. It is a method built for survival, but it can also be designed to punish an enemy that rushes forward too quickly. That is where the story moves from withdrawal to trap, and the difference rests on discipline. The main point must stay clear, because this choice was tactical under heavy pressure, not a sign that the defense has collapsed. The ground may shift, but the force can remain dangerous if it retreats with purpose. And that purpose sets up the crucial question of who controls the corridor when the pullback begins. Ukraine pulls its main force out of southern Myrnohrad for one hard reason, because staying would turn a defended pocket into a trapped pocket. When drones watch the roads and airstrikes hit the rear, a fixed cluster becomes easier to map and easier to cut off. A unit can still fight inside a strongpoint, yet it can lose the exit in one bad hour if Russian troops slip around the flanks. So commanders trade a slice of ground for the survival of trained teams, and that choice is about keeping the war going tomorrow. That single decision explains why Ukraine starts moving before the ring can tighten. Ukraine's pullback aims for a safer northern line, because a second line is only strong if it is built with intact units. An organized withdrawal keeps radios, vehicles, medics, and small leaders together, so the force arrives as a tool, not as survivors. It also reduces panic runs across open ground, which is where FPV drones and shelling punish mistakes the fastest. Even if Russian losses are reported as high in a single day, including a Ukrainian claim of 980 casualties in 24 hours, encirclement can still happen when a pocket waits too long. So the north is chosen as a reset point, and that reset opens the door for a second move. At the same time, Ukraine tries to shape what Russia thinks it sees, because perception can move soldiers faster than orders. If Russian assault groups find quiet positions and empty trenches, they can assume a breakthrough and sell it as a big win. That is when discipline drops, and basic scouting can be skipped. That belief becomes bait, because it pulls attackers onto predictable routes and into prepared angles of fire. The goal is not to fool Russia forever. It is to fool Russia long enough for the first rush to become costly. That brief window is where the withdraw to trap idea starts to take form. This is why the 35th Marine Brigade matters, because a corridor must stay open while the main force disengages. Holding two flanks is not a headline job, yet it decides whether the pullback becomes a rout or becomes a reset. The task is to block side pushes, break small infiltrations, and keep traffic moving on the exit routes. That can mean strong points covering crossings, drones watching approach lines, and quick teams sealing gaps before they widen. When the corridor holds, Ukraine moves people and key kit north without losing structure, and structure is what keeps a defense alive. That protection role is what turns a retreat lane into a controlled passage under fire. The corridor also frames the trap, because the same flanks that protect a retreat can set the boundaries of an ambush. If Russian troops rush into the space left behind, they can meet machine guns and drones from positions that were never abandoned, only repositioned. The aim is to stop momentum, force bunching, and buy time for the last elements to clear the danger zone. So Russia may take southern blocks, yet it is pushed to pay for them in tempo and in losses, and that is the price Ukraine is trying to set. That pricing of time leads straight into how drones turn the western side into a kill zone. The 35th Marine Brigade matters in this story because it is framed as the unit that can hold the door while others move. It is not introduced as a random name, because its earlier record is used to explain why it can take a high-risk corridor mission and keep control. Reports describe the brigade as having fought hard in the south before, including actions during Ukraine's 2022 campaign in Kherson and later combat in 2023. That past is used as credibility, because this job is not about bravery on camera. It is about discipline under pressure. A unit that has learned how to regroup fast is more likely to keep a withdrawal from turning into chaos. That reputation shapes how the audience reads the next hours, and it explains why this brigade is trusted when timing is tight. The date November 1st, 2025 is then used as a psychological trigger because it links the brigade to a fresh wound. According to the account, an awards event connected to the brigade was struck by 2 Iskander missiles and 3 Garand drones in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The reported result was severe, with 12 service members and 7 civilians killed and 36 people wounded. An investigation followed, and a commander tied to the event was charged for negligence, which signals how dangerous large gatherings are under modern strike conditions. This detail is not only a tragedy because it also shows what precision fires can do when routine breaks basic security rules. It also explains why the unit's mood could harden, even while the operational plan stays professional. The revenge angle should be handled carefully, because war is not a movie, and intent is hard to measure from the outside. What can be said is that units hit in the rear often return to the front with sharper focus, and that focus can translate into tighter ambush work. When a corridor must stay open, emotion does not win, because timing, fields of fire, and drone coordination decide success. This is why the narrative keeps a neutral tone, yet still notes that the brigade had reasons to be relentless once Russian troops began to move. That mindset matters, because it helps turn a defensive task into an active trap. Then the eastern approach becomes the moment where Russia thinks it is winning, and that confidence becomes a vulnerability. Russian troops are described as moving in from the nearby settlement of Novoekonomikny towards southern Myrnohrad, expecting to occupy positions that had just been vacated. The advance is portrayed as almost casual, which suggests weak caution and limited overhead awareness on the route. It also hints at a gap in observation drones, and that gap can turn a straight road into a blind tunnel. That is where the trap snaps shut, because machine guns are positioned to cut the lead elements while reconnaissance drones watch the approach and help adjust timing. The first groups are hit, and follow-on soldiers are pulled into the same lane, which turns the approach into a corridor of repeated losses. In a drone-era fight, that pattern is deadly, because the defender does not need to chase, it only needs to keep the entry point under control. That eastern shock sets up the wider drone kill zone on the western side, where the pressure becomes even harder to escape. The western side becomes the kill zone, because the tree line and the railway strip offer Russia the kind of cover that can start an encirclement. In open ground, movement shows up fast, but under branches, infantry can slide forward with less warning. That is why this belt matters, because if Russia can build pressure there, the corridor behind the Ukrainian withdrawal becomes easier to pinch. Some reporting has described drone pressure zones stretching out to around 20 kilometers in certain sectors, which shows how far this kind of control can reach when drones act like patrols. So the West is not a side story, it is the place where a ring can form without a big headline battle. That is the pressure point Ukraine tries to crush before it hardens. Ukraine's first answer is FPV drones, because a small drone can slip between trees and hit a soldier who thinks he is hidden. Cover used to mean out of sight, but FPV changed that because the camera can move with the target and keep searching. This forces Russian teams to move slower, speak less, and break into smaller clusters, which damages coordination. If a unit cannot stay together, it cannot time a push, and timing is what makes an encirclement close cleanly. Even a near miss matters, because it freezes men in place and breaks the rhythm of a forward crawl. That loss of rhythm is the opening Ukraine needs to widen the pressure. This is where octocopters matter, because drops turn the tree line into a place where grouping becomes dangerous. An octocopter does not need a perfect direct hit, because a blast near a cluster can still injure, scatter, and force a slow extraction. That creates a second problem for Russia, because wounded troops pull attention, slow leaders, and clog narrow paths. It also disrupts the basic task of building a staging point, since any spot that starts to look like a gathering area becomes a target. The effect is not only casualties, it is instability, because units cannot hold a stable base long enough to plan. That instability feeds the next layer of the trap. Night does not solve the problem, because thermal drones can keep hunting when normal sight fades. A body gives off heat even when it is still, so hiding becomes less about camouflage and more about luck and distance. This denies the usual infantry reset, where teams pause, regroup, and try again at first light. When rest is risky, fatigue stacks up, and tired soldiers make louder mistakes and slower decisions. Those errors make detection easier, and detection brings more strikes, so the cycle keeps turning. That cycle is designed to make the West feel unsafe at every hour. The real purpose of this kill zone is not only to destroy people, because the tactical goal is to stop the encirclement attempt before it can touch the corridor. Ukraine is trying to make every approach cost time, since time is the one resource a withdrawing force cannot replace. If Russian troops must crawl, pause, and fall back under drone pressure, then the closing hand never becomes a closed fist. That means the corridor stays open longer without Ukraine having to fight a large, messy ground battle inside the trees. Even if Russia later claims ground, the withdrawal avoids being trapped, and the defense can reform on the northern line with real strength. And once the West is pinned down, the story naturally shifts to what air power does deeper behind the line. Air support becomes the hinge of this withdrawal because it hits deeper targets instead of chasing every Russian squad at the front. F-16 and Su-27s are described as working above the ground fight, and the purpose is blunt: slow the flow of men and gear that could seal an encirclement. When jets strike staging points or drone coordination sites, the frontline push can keep moving, yet it starts to move with less control and less backup. A unit can advance on momentum, but it cannot keep pressure if ammunition arrives late and replacements are forced to wait farther back. That is why these sorties matter, since they shape what Russia can do in the next hours, not just in the next trench. And that deeper pressure makes the corridor plan more realistic. The targeting logic is denial, because reinforcement is what turns a costly probe into a closing ring. If Russia can rotate fresh assault groups into the same sector on schedule, then defenders get worn down and the corridor becomes easier to cut. So the strikes are aimed behind the lead elements, where troops regroup and where vehicles and drones are prepared for the next push. Ukraine has signaled that F-16s are increasingly used beyond pure defense, though exact results are hard to confirm from outside. The key point is that air power can remove Russia's second breath, which is often what finishes an encirclement. And once that second breath is delayed, the ground trap has time to work. Precision weapons fit this mission because disruption needs accuracy more than blast radius. A GBU-39 class small-diameter bomb is built for a chosen point with GPS-style guidance and standoff range, so a jet can strike and leave without flying low over the target. That matters in a contested sky, because exposure time is risk time. The effect is often a planning shock, since a site used for shelter or coordination can become unusable in minutes. And that shock feeds straight into the corridor fight. The corridor held by the 35th Marine Brigade becomes the center of gravity because time is the currency of a clean pullback. If flanks stay firm and traffic keeps flowing, then the main force can move north with vehicles, radios, and heavy weapons, not just with tired infantry. Drone pressure can slow Russian movement, but the corridor fails if Russia can mass at the right moment and cut the exits. Airstrikes that delay that massing create a withdrawal window, meaning routes remain open long enough to clear the exposed zone. In plain terms, jets buy minutes, and minutes save units. Russia may still take parts of the southern area because Ukraine is not claiming the ground is permanently protected. But the meaning changes if the capture comes after an ambush and after reinforcement was disrupted, because then the attacker pays more for less operational effect. A free advance would mean walking into empty positions and immediately pushing on to choke the north, yet this plan aims to make every step slow and expensive. Exact losses are hard to confirm fast, but the pattern is clear, because overconfidence pulls troops onto predictable routes and makes them easier to fix and strike. That pattern drains tempo, and tempo is what an encirclement needs most. So even when the map shifts, the attacker can still lose the initiative. And once initiative slips, the campaign becomes harder to finish. The result is a layered defense because Ukraine's move north is meant to build a second belt instead of being caught in the first. A second belt works when units arrive intact, and command remains coherent, so Russia must spend time and manpower again to restart the squeeze. The city remains under threat, but Ukraine avoids being caught whole, and that changes the cost of the next Russian move. And that cost sets up what comes after Myrnohrad. Myrnohrad should not be read as a simple lost ground update, because it shows a modern tactic where withdrawal can still strike back. When a corridor is held at the right moment and a kill zone is built deep enough, the attacker can step forward and still lose control of the fight. In this kind of battlefield, drones do not just kill, they also delay. A 10-minute delay can save a brigade, while a 10-minute rush can strand crews and vehicles. That is why timing, not territory, becomes the headline. For Russia, the danger is that a feeling of progress can turn into a slide into a prepared death zone, where machine guns fix units, FPV drones hunt them, and airstrikes isolate the rear. For Ukraine, the risk is just as real, because this approach demands strict discipline, steady reconnaissance, and tight coordination across drones, infantry, and jets. If any link breaks, the corridor can collapse fast, and a planned pullback can turn into a messy escape. This is why Myrnohrad matters beyond one town, because it shows how wars now punish speed without vision. The open question is whether this pullback-to-trap model can be repeated without thinning the next defensive layer, or whether Russia will adjust and force a different outcome. For more clear reporting on real battles, modern weapons, and the politics behind them, subscribe to Military Force.